we did the red scales. We did some dry brushing on part of the body. Before tonight, I went through and did the rest of the scales in red contrast, so we can see he's looking pretty good. Before starting tonight, I did a base coat on what we're going to focus on today, this kind of underbelly scales with Rathbone flesh, just kind of to save some time and have that part done already. So I just went over that area, thinned it down, and just did a single coat, which is all that was needed because it was already over this kind of light gray, which worked out pretty well. So I'm going to take a look at doing those scales. So we're taking a look at the box art, as we're kind of focusing on here. We're just going to look at the underbelly. I'm not going to do this on the inside of the wing here because the membrane of the wing is going to be a different color anyway. I'm also going to do the same technique on the horns. Since we did dry brushing last time, I'm going to try to get this in a slightly better position. Dry brushing last time, I'm going to do a more traditional layered approach to these underbelly scales. So we have Rathbone flesh on there. Next up we're going to do is wash them with Seraphim sepia, or sepia. I don't know how to pronounce it. I like sepia because it's easier to say. So I'm going to take a look at we're going to basically just cover this whole area that we're working on with this wash. It works a lot like the contrast paint, where we're going to be focusing on having it collect in the recesses to give us that, instant shade. And then we'll take a couple colors and work on highlighting the scales a little more individually than last time, just because it's not nearly as big of an area and that's not going to take as long. But this is what it's pretty strong focal point of the model. This area, the scales, it's very different from the red of the rest of it, so I wanted to put a little bit of extra effort into it, or at least a different effort. And kind of the whole point of this tutorial series is that I want to focus on showing different kinds of painting techniques. So first one, looked at the contrast method, which is super simple, followed up by some dry brushing, which is also quite simple. Oh, sorry, just realized that was probably out of shot there. So just going over all this scale area to give it this instant shade. What's nice about these shades is they typically dry pretty fast, so for this particular tutorial we're going to take a look at highlighting just part of it. I'm not going to do the entire thing like we did with the scales the red scales last time. We just showed off how to do the technique on part of it, just because you probably don't want to watch me paint this entire thing. I guess if you do, let me know, and I can do more of these with different models and things. Not to say I think I'm, the best painter out there. I think I'm pretty good. Been doing it a long time now. And then I'll get better at these tutorial videos with practice as well. So let's finish up this shade. Just making sure we're getting all these spots. These feet are a little in the way here, but luckily if I get the shade on the red part, I don't think it's going to do much, because the shade isn't as dark as the red anyway. It might darken that area just a little bit just because it's another layer of pigment, but I don't think it's going to be anything too bad. I totally just touched where I just painted on the tail. That was silly. Let's make sure we cover that back up. Alright, so there we go after the shade. So you can see the whole thing's a bit darker, and our recesses are nice and shaded. So normally I let that totally dry before doing something else. Usually I'll go on to another model or something else that I'm currently working on. I'm going to give that a minute to dry. While we wait, I want to show you, grab something off my shelf real quick, kind of inspiration. There we go. So here is a wormling of a red dragon that I painted a while ago, again for my D&D game. that actually I didn't actually use it as a red dragon wormling. It was more of it stood in place of what's called a guard drake, so it actually didn't have wings. But I thought, they're cool, and eventually I'd probably use them anyway. So obviously I'm doing this a little bit differently. Where here I did the orange on the underbelly scales. Sorry, it keeps going out of focus. There we go. Did orange on the underbelly scales. But I want to do the same thing with the yellow for the membranes and its like spine. I don't know what to call that. It's spines, I guess. Whoops. So, obviously it'll just kind of look like a big one of these eventually. More or less, just less orange on the front, on the underbelly. In case you're wondering about the big old hole in the front, I feel like it's probably obvious, but just in case people aren't aware, that is for the stand for it to go on. So when it's on its base, it just hangs out on there, which is cool. So it's suspended up. I assume I know the blue dragon comes with lightning, because blue dragons breathe lightning. So of course the red dragon comes with fire, which fits right up into its mouth. And eventually, we can paint that as well. And boom, now I got a fire-breathing dragon. What's nice about these is, again, you can just do it with contrast. For the little wormling, he's got that same kind of clear stuff coming in his mouth. I just painted over it with the orange contrast, and that was it. And it looks kind of cool. It's still semi-transparent. Hard to tell here, but it's still kind of transparent, and it works. It looks pretty good. All right, put those back to the side. I feel like, I can't remember if I mentioned this in the other video, where for the last one I want to do, I forgot about it the other day when I was kind of planning things out. I want to do a basing tutorial, just real basic. A lot of people get intimidated by that, thinking they don't know how to complete the base of their models, so they just kind of leave it. And I think it really makes the model look more complete. It's finished when you base it. So I just realized I said I was going to do the same thing on the horns, so let's apply this to our horns real quick. That'll give the underbelly a little more time to dry before we start layering. I picked out some different paints I'll talk about in a second, about how we're going to layer some pattern type stuff on those scales. So again, we'll just cover everything on the horns. Apologies, I keep forgetting to look at my shot here. Normally I have another screen set up so I can see what I'm filming at the same time, but I don't currently have access to that, so I gotta just kind of crane my neck around and look at my phone and say, oh, oops, I'm out of shot again. My bad. Alright, so real quick once over on the horns. And we'll find the most dried area. Dry off our brush, of course. Give it a little point. Okay. So it should be right where we started. Probably right in the middle here. If it's a little wet, I think that's pretty okay. A little bit of mixture of the paint I don't think is going to be too bad. So my plan right now is basically we're going to give him some texture to these scales using a series of neutral-ish colors here. We got these are all Citadel, because that's all I have is Citadel paints. Again, you can just get these at the Dragon, most game stores, hobby stores. I'm going to start with some Ushabti bone. It's obviously a bone color. I'm going to use some Rathbone. Again, another kind of bone color, but lighter. And then we have what's called Deepkin flesh for the Deepkin, which is on guys like this. I painted their flesh with Deepkin flesh, which is pretty, appropriate. So I'll show you what I'm talking about here. We'll start with the Ushabti bone. Take a little bit of a look at thinning paints too. We didn't do that last time because we used contrast and dry brushing. So I'm going to load up some paint on my palette. I'm going to do a little area, so I'm not going to take a ton here. So I got paint on the palette. I'm going to take just a little dip of water. Put this so we can see it. It's got my sweet water pot, and I'm just going to get a little dip on the brush and then mix that water in. So we get a little bit more water. We want relatively thin consistency, but not so it's going to be running all over the place. What I'm going to do here is we're going to start with the edge of the scales, kind of work our way up so the edge of them are much brighter than the top. So I'll just do one, show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to lower this a bit because now I have to hold it all awkward to keep it in shot, and that's not going to help painting. There we go. I think that's okay. I'm just going to paint the edge of it and a little ways up, just to kind of brighten it on the edge. Around there. Trying to go too far up because our shade is still a little wet. I'm going to be covering roughly, I'd say a little bit less than half of the scale, so we have room for a little bit of build-up of the other colors. I can't see that side anyway, so I'm not going to bother doing that right now. So we'll just do a handful of these scales right now. That one's still pretty wet. And if you're new and you're getting your paint all over the place, that's fine. Just takes practice for the steady hand. If you have issues with your hands shaking or whatever, that's okay too. Again, like I said last time, if you're painting this for your D&D table, people aren't going to care if it looks perfect. I hope. I would imagine. Unless there are people that are like, oh, I could paint better than that, and then say, okay, well then paint my models for me that are going to go on the table. You're going to fight them. All right, so that was Ushabti Bone. Next up is going to be Rathbone. And we'll give this a second to dry. Give it a good shake. Alright, so Rathbone is one of the new hotness in the terms of paint, where it's a contrast specialty paint. Came out with the contrast line as a spray that looks like this. So here's a Space Marine infiltrator sprayed with the Rathbone. So he looks good. I don't have him as opposed to just, boring gray plastic. And that way, it's really good for contrast, because contrast likes to go over light colors for the bright color to pop. Obviously, there are darker colors in contrast as well. All these here are contrast. But it helps for it to be a nice base coat. I like that a lot. I like the Rathbone. Alright, so they also sell it in the pot, so like if you miss a spot or you mess up and you gotta cover up a spot, you can just apply it from the pot. So I'm going to do this the same thing as last time, except we're not going to go up the scale as far. So we're focusing more on the edge. And we'll build up that lightness. So these will have a couple layers of this on these scales, and they'll really pop. So we want some of the last layer still showing further up the scale to kind of cover it all in that one. You see, it's not always exact, but I want to show that buildup of layers so we can have that gradual color change. So this is just, you hear somebody talk about highlighting, that's what we're doing here. We're highlighting it as we get to the edge of the scale, it gets lighter. There. Easy peasy. So we'll clean off our brush. Give that a moment to dry a bit, and then we'll do our Deepkin flesh, which is going to be, you can see, a little bit lighter. Actually, you know what? I don't know if I like that as a lighter color. I almost think I should have gone the other way and gone Deepkin, then Rathbone. So what we're going to do instead I think I have anything between. You know what? It's a tutorial. Let's look at mixing the colors a little bit. A lot of people get intimidated by this, so I think it'd be good to take a look. So let's open up this Deepkin Flesh, which I like this one a lot. It's you might think, well, it's just white or gray, which it pretty much is. It's a very, very light gray that's a little. It has a little bit of tones of blue, just barely. So we're gonna mix these two together. You can see that on the palette, right? And just get a lighter Deepkin Flesh. Actually want it even a little bit lighter, so I'm going to clean off my brush. Close it up so it doesn't dry too much. I'm going to add in just a little bit more Rathbone. And now we should have something kind of in between. We'll apply it and see if it looks different, and if not, we'll just go straight white. Alright, so that should be dry because it was a very thin layer we applied. So one more time, we'll take a look. This time we're going to apply it just to the edge of the scale. Alright, I don't know about you, but that doesn't look different enough for me. So I'm going to go real extreme here. Let's say, well, we mixed up color, but it didn't work. Instead of trashing it, because I hate to waste paint even a little bit, we're going to add some white to our mixture here. Ah, come back, dragon. So this is basic white scar, which is just the white paint. So we'll take a bunch of that on the brush, and we're going to mix it in to our already mixed paint, which should definitely make it lighter. And this should give us one final little pop on the edge of the scale. So I'm going to twist the brush to get it to a nice point. Let's go after one we didn't look at before. How are we in the shot? That's better. And we'll just apply it to the very edge of the scale. Oops. See, this one is making a difference. We can see a difference. At least I can here. I'll get a close up in a second. Apply just to the edge of this, the very edge of the scale. I should give us one more little layer to really make these look different. So the ideal here is to get a good contrast between the bright edge of the scale and the dark back of the scale. I don't know how to term that. So like up in here where it's darker from the shade, there's a big contrast to the edge of the scale that is now nice and bright. So I'll bring this a bit closer. So we have some layering. Let's kind of, we'll cover up part of it. Guess I'll just cover up my shadow so we can focus on just what's done there. And to me that looks pretty good. We can imagine the whole thing. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to do the entire thing right now, but we can imagine if the whole thing is going to look like that, it's going to look real cool. It'll be much brighter than just the Rathbone flesh with the shade, of course, because all the scales will have that little extra color. I think that's going to look great. So that is layering. So we've got a couple different layers of color, which will give us another different texture to go along with the dry brushing. So a short and sweet one here. Layering is pretty simple. It's just finding those edges to highlight and building it up in a natural way. Something that can find your focal point and make it pop. So what we're going to take a look at next video is the membranes of the wing and these like spines. And then after that we'll do I'm going to do all the claws and teeth, just real simple. I'm going to paint over them Rathbone and then hit them with, if I can find it here, skeleton horde, which is just going to make it look like bone. And then the last video we will do the base and make that look a little more presentable. I'm going to try to make it look like lava and lava rock, so it's something that just cooled maybe, because red dragons like volcanoes. So thanks for checking it in. Don't forget about bearded dragon for your hobby needs. If you haven't watched a video about the red scales yet, you can go back on the For Whom the Die Rolls channel, just be the one before this one, and take a look at dry brushing on top of contrast paints. Thanks for watching. I never do it right the first time.